Glad to have them all here tonight. I'm sorry we had rain and other things that complicated our way a little bit here, but I'm sure we'll enjoy it anyway. Happy to have you all here. I'm Ed Stork. I'm president of Laguna Beach Historical Society. And if you've not been with us before, we're glad you're here. And we'd be happy if you would join us. We run entirely on memberships. We're all volunteers. You'll know that after a while. And we have regular programs. We have a newsletter. We have special events. And we have, what did I miss? Our newsletter. There's our newsletter right here. And her husband's one of the speakers tonight. I want to try something I've never done before, and I don't know if it's going to work very well. But I'm going to read the introductions off my phone. And we'll see if it works here. Okay, here's a short bio on each of these people. Dr. David Lagrew, a current Laguna Beach resident and husband of our board member, Gary Lagrew, as I told you, is the Executive Medical Director of Providence St. Joseph of Southern California. Dr. George Harper, he is long-term Laguna Beach resident, retired obstetrician, gynecologist, and practiced in Laguna Beach. And Dr. Woody White is a Laguna Beach resident, son of Dr. Woody White Sr., both of which practice OB-GYN in Laguna Beach. And they're going to talk to us about the first hospital in Orange County here, South Orange County. Please give them a welcome.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, and by the way, I was given specific instructions to keep the microphone close by my boss. So if I don't, George throws something at me. Couple of things to tell you about tonight. I'm going to give a little slideshow and background of the hospital. As most of you can tell, I didn't grow up around here. You can probably tell that by my accent. I guess 2 years now I've lived in Laguna Beach, so I am a resident, but for that reason, when decided to give this talk, I called in a couple of the local experts that have been here for years and years. So George and Woody are the real experts about what went on. My only experience with the hospital was actually twofold. When I was a fellow at Long Beach Memorial, we used to have to, one of the things we did is hop in a helicopter and fly out to different hospitals to get high-risk mothers and fly them back to Long Beach. And during my first week there, I was told about this and what to expect and what you did on the helicopter, etc. And they said, if you're really lucky, you'll get to go to this hospital in South Orange County on the ocean. And you fly right down the beach and get to see all the beachgoers out. So and then when I came back in 1988, I was part of the faculty of UCI and was assigned South Coast is one of the hospitals that I went out and gave perinatal talks to with George and Woody and team. So that's my experience with the hospital, other than like many in the room driving past it or that sort of thing. And I've been fortunate in the 2 years not to have to be taken into the ER there. So that's a good thing. So I do want to tell you the history. I think most will be surprised who don't know the history. It's a very unique place, and as the slide says, it is the first hospital in South Orange County. And through my medical career and what I've done, you really appreciate the fact that hospitals, to put it in an arts-like thing, hospitals are stages where a lot of important part of people's lives are played out, if you think about it. Obviously for us OBs, we think about bringing new life in, but obviously people pass away there. People get good and bad news. People, one way or another, hospitals can impact people's lives in a great way. So it really is an important part of this community, and it's been that way, as you'll see, for several decades. The story actually starts, though, not at the hospital, but actually down the way here at the police station with this hero. Gordon French was a police officer with the Laguna Police Department, and early on, and I know it's on Friday the 13th, believe it or not, on Friday the 13th, 1953, this man, Carl Miller, comes into town and starts passing bad checks. And he and his mother had stolen a car in Arizona, came over to this community we're going through, and basically what happened is he went out to the Hudson dealer on Pacific Coast Highway, tried to pass a $50 check, but the dealer called in to the bank and they said, we don't know anything about this. And so he called the police, who came out and arrested Miller and his mother and took them down to the police station down here. And unfortunately, during the booking, Miller pulled out a revolver, held everybody up, took Gordon French hostage. They went out the back door, and as they were going out there, French tried to jump him, and he shot Officer French in the abdomen. And the sad part of it is, obviously, Officer French died from blood loss en route up to Hope Hospital, which apparently at that time was quite the ride to get up there. Many of you would know better than I. And he dies from his wound, leaving a wife and 2 children. Miller, interestingly enough, hops in the car, or steals the car now, drives down. He stopped at Capistrano Beach, bought some liquor. He then went down to San Clemente where the police caught him, and they had a gunfight and apparently inflicted a wound that killed him. And then they took the mother ended up going to the up to Santa Ana to the Orange County Jail, and that was the last of that. So if you go back and look at the newspapers at the time, you get a lot of detail about this killing and what happened and things of that nature. And you also begin to see, this was 4 days later, you begin to see the community responds first by setting up a fund for the family. And I think this one you can actually see listed out all the different, everybody gives money to Mrs. French to take care of her and her family. And it gets to be quite a lot. $1,100 in 1953 was worth a lot more than it is today. And so anyway, the community starts the outpouring. And actually, if you go down the way to the, there is this Eternal Legacy plaque that is dedicated to Gordon French and another police officer who was killed in the line of duty. And if you go on the website, there's a little spiel about Gordon French and him. And so it's really in the, I think when people have a tragedy like this, the neat thing is sometimes something good comes out of that. And in this case, this is what stirred the community to start collecting and come up with the idea that, wait a second, South Orange County is growing. We really don't, there's a need for a more local community hospital. And it really goes back, though, apparently to that. So we look at the 1950s. As I said, it was 1953 when Officer French was shot. The first article I could find in 1954 describes a group of people beginning to form the committee to put things together, and for about 4 years they raised funds and things of that nature. And by 1956 they actually had enough funding to get federal government matching funds. And so they actually had enough to start building. And within some 2 years, they went from breaking ground to building, which we were sort of laughing. We had lunch the other day together, and today in 2 years, you couldn't get the state to approve, the name on the building, much less build a hospital. But anyway, in those days, they were a little more lax about regulations, so it was kind of nice. And this is the initial group. I found this is a website. We run that? Does the society run this website? Anyway, you can see the names on here, and one name I'll point out in particular is John Weld. And Mr. Weld, as everybody knows, was a very prominent actor in a really neat movie that I think, has that been a year now that was shown? But as you'll see in many of the pictures, he played quite a prominent role in helping everything. And this group convinced the Whiting brothers. Eric, who were the Whiting brothers?
Whiting Ranch abuts the Irvine Ranch in what is now up in the Lake Forest area.
Yeah.
It was 5,000 acres. It's Whiting Ranch Wilderness Park is the main thing there.
So they convinced to do it, and as we'll see, the Irvine family, Myford Irvine, who was the head of the Irvine Foundation at that time, ponies up $60,000 for buying the land and grading it, and they're off and running. And here's Myford, and you can see he's paying the check to John Weld there. Here's Myford's family. And it's sort of interesting, I guess, that Joan Irvine Smith just died a couple weeks ago. Another very prominent member of the Irvine family. Myford actually passed away, I guess, in 1959 under sort of suspicious circumstance, but that's going to be another program Eric's going to give. This is actually the financial statement from '59. I was thinking about this as I was preparing. I don't know if that's the same 60,000 or they gave another 60,000, but you can see that things that were the Diabetic Youth Foundation got 20,000, et cetera. I'll let you guys read it. And things of that nature. And so things get serious and the town gets rolling. When I found this picture, the folks at the hospital actually had this in their archives, and it reminded me a lot of my paternal grandmother used to have a hairdo like that, and it's quite the day. And anyway, everybody starts working together and getting money. And if you go back again and look through all the old articles, you begin to see everybody passing checks and doing different things and putting money together. They obviously did have to get plans and things of that nature. The architect is on here, and I'm blanking on his name, Horinus or something of that nature. Victor Andrews was the president of the board committee, but another prominent person that we'll talk about, Adolph Crotch. I know that sounds a little French. Help me, George. There's too much appellation going on. Yeah. But anyway, very prominent as well, and you can see people giving different money. The initial buildings, the first 74-bed building, was estimated, and I think came out of budget at $1.5 million. Today, if you look at hospital beds in California, it's somewhere between 1.5 and 2.0 per bed to build a hospital. And here's some of the plans, which you can see. This is the area graded off and the sloping, and this is PCH down here. again, you can see plans starting to fall in. The newspapers were just full of articles. This was like a big thing in the 50s to talk about this. Another picture of John Weld, you can see him over here at the groundbreaking, the mayor's Jesse Riddle from Laguna. This is a prayer service as they're breaking ground. I guess they're praying that they don't hit their foot or something, or get run over by one of these interesting machines here. But anyway, it's, every event was, covered by the press, and people went out and made a big deal about it. Here's John Well getting a check from she's the head of the gardening club, and they gave money to make sure that the landscaping was done right and things of that nature. So you can see where they were very smart to get everybody involved, and hit the different perspectives. And I think it really sort of puts the community, if you will, in community hospital. The movie stars got into it as well. I think everybody knows Harriet Nelson. We think this is the wife of George, Red Scott.
The top on Cassidy's wife.
I told you I wasn't from around. Although my brother did have this cereal bowl that had Hopalong Cassidy in the bottom, and my mom used to get him to eat all his cereal and see Hoppy. So that's funny. And then, interestingly enough, this article, Betty Davis supposedly gave the $25,000 that put him over the top of the funds they needed to get the matching dollars from the federal government. So this one's kind of dark. Again, you can see a lot of again, there were a lot of checks, a lot of everybody, if you wanted to get in the paper, I guess you gave some money to build the hospital. But the other thing is, you read these articles, you realize it wasn't just Laguna, but San Clemente and the other South County, towns got into this because, again, at that time there were no other hospitals. In my research, we'll talk about opens in 59, Hogue had opened in 52, Mission and San Clemente hospitals opened in 71, and Saddleback opened in 1974. So this was the time period for construction. They get the money, so now they start the construction. The garden club starts planting trees on Arbor Day. Again, it's really kind of a hoot to read through some of these stories and things of that nature. And finally, it's completed. Again, as I said earlier, it starts out as a 74-bed facilities. You can see it was a big deal to stock the gift shop and get all the stuff in there so that when people came in, they could get their chiclets. And I don't think they sold cigarettes. I don't know. I'll let Woody and George answer that. Yeah. And then opening day, 3,000 people come. Wow. The El Toro Marine Band plays on. On the stands are, all the dignitaries and things of that nature. I think one of the senators from California came, etc. And so they had a number of people celebrate. You can see the new hospital up there. And here's another part. Yes. Roughly July 2nd, 1959. Yeah, so, and you can see all the dignitaries, they're saying the Pledge to Allegiance there, which again wouldn't happen, I guess it would today. I don't know, we get in that discussion. They talked about, obviously, a number of the doctors and things of that nature that were there. and, it was a big deal. One of the fun parts was a few days prior to that, the paper ran this dedication issue, and it's 6 pages of really interesting stuff. First of all, you can look at all the ads. Karen's really proud that Bouchard is still here, right? So that's exciting. But most of the stuff, I think Penny's must be gone, right? You guys can look through it and stuff. Let's see, and then the other 3 pages, and I'm going to come back to this one. Although I want you to see that the winner of the first baby got a moo-moo for the mama. They got a lily for the baby and a round trip for two, and it doesn't tell you, it's mysterious. So, yeah. And it was a fine hospital. We just don't use the word fine like that anymore. But anyway, there's a lot of fun articles in this, and again, I won't read over them all, but I think there's some really funny things. First of all, it's easy to reach because it's just 10 minutes from town. So they, kind of calm people down. And if you go back to our story with Officer French, obviously, hey, that was a big deal, right? This is the one I love, is that they had all this modern equipment that was a really big deal. They had this where the doctor could pick up the telephone and dictate. It didn't have to have the dictation machine right beside them. They could call in anywhere and get their reports dictated. So that was pretty funny. This Virginia LaPetite message, you guys didn't know her, right, Woody? You said, yeah. But anyway, she's the head nurse for the OB unit, and you can see this old sterilization machine. They had a few of the old, here's Papa, and again, we'll talk about him in a minute. Here's their modern OR, and it's basically a table and a light. High equipment. I don't think they had any robots in there, did they? No robots, so. And then they had some articles on some of the prominent doctors, Dr. Burns, who leads up pathology, and Dr. Cole, who leads up radiology. And I think George said these were the richest people in town after 20 years, right? Yeah. So
Roy
they
Burns
did
just
really
died a
well.
couple months ago.
Yeah. And this Stanley Vogel was the first hospital administrator for the place, and you can see the auxiliary members there are all in their uniforms and ready to go. So I'll go back to the first baby, which, by the way, was not the first baby born there. Even though we'll talk about her, and she's interesting in herself. But 2 days before the hospital opens, one of the maintenance people they had hired's wife was carrying twins and delivers at the hospital, but it wasn't open. So they put her in an ambulance and the twins and take them to Hope. And unfortunately, the other part of the story is that the 2 babies died because they were premature, which in those days would have been quite normal. And then the other thing, Mrs. Stanley Vogel, Volga, the wife of the administrator wanted to be first to go, but the day before it opens, she delivers and has to go up to Hope. So she missed out on the moo-moo, and they were very disappointed. The first of it was actually this young lady here, and I'm blanking on it. Her name's up here, and I'm too close. Oh yeah, Judith Barofe, and she's from Costa Mesa, and delivers the first baby and gets all of that neat stuff that we saw. She gets the silver cup and the moo-moo. I don't think that's the moo-moo, I'm pretty sure. And again, here's John again, and again, just some other stories. I won't go into it, but it's really had a lot of fun reading all this stuff because, like the patio furniture. It talks about, you know, if you want quiet, because there's all these ambulances running around getting to the hospital, buy our lawn furniture and you can just sit down and relax. There's all this. So that was really getting it open, and so then really what I would call the golden age of South Coast Community Hospital, which sometime during there, and as hard as I could try, I couldn't see the date, changes its name to South Coast Medical Center. But in the day, hospital was considered old school, and so that's when you began to see everybody want to be a medical center, not a hospital. And that's why it's 1.5 million to 2 million to build a bed. Adventist?
No, it was before that.
Yeah, probably in the, I would say early 80s. Yeah. So again, you begin to see things added on, lots of, another 105 beds. I think by the time every bed's built, it's 210 was the total. They start mental health services, as I said earlier in '71, Mission and San Clemente open. And the reason this is a big deal is because, of course, by the time these guys open and Saddleback opens, and we get the other changes in healthcare, that's when the hospital begins to get into financial problems through there. But during this time, for the most part, there was just a lot of building and things of that nature going on. And again, you know, once it opens, you get to see all the modern equipment. This is a machine where they're actually filling up IV bottles. Of course, in those today, we purchase all that stuff. We don't, you know, no one, they're all mass manufactured, but in those days, you needed the big sterilizer to mix the solutions and things of that nature. This is part of, I think, some of their testing during their emergency training, and I've got some more pictures of that. This is Myford Irvine's wife, and she goes on the board. Like you say, he passed away in '59, and then she joined the board for a few years, and so you still had the linkage to the Irvine family at that time. And so part of the early years was all these exciting things like mock disasters. And I think, Woody, you said you did these when you were a kid?
Yeah, my whole family participated.
Yeah, so, you know, somebody had to get killed, right? Maimed or mad, whatever. And anyway, no, and if you think about it, especially in the early 60s, that's when we were building bomb shelters and they had all the different things. So civil defense things were a big thing. Here's Papa Croach right here. And again, the hospital got one, this is a big deal, they got accredited by the Joint Commission within about a year and a half, I think it was. So, well, that's 62. And that sort of thing, and that made big news, as well as the headliner that comes out shining. Here's some more pictures. You sure that ain't you, Woody? Kind of a couple line thing there. Yeah, and all the stretchers, and of course it makes big news. This is Dr. Cole, the head radiologist, and of course, he, you know, and I'm sure. Like I say, if you ever had an x-ray here, he wasn't the one putting you on the table. But anyway, he was the one you were getting the bill from. And then, of course, this is a really nice picture of the gift shop and what was in there. Again, I don't see any cigarettes. There could be cigarettes. I bet they had matches for the cigarettes. Something like that. And of course, this is the Laguna Beach High School art contest on, you know, giving to the hospital. Again, you get the flavor. There's a lot of fundraising going on here, and obviously lunches and things of that nature. The hairdos are getting a little better than when we saw them last. They had lots of open houses. This is a picture of that. This is the elegant Valentine Ball at the Balboa Bay club, and I think, and I don't know, I'll get George and Woody to comment on this, but whenever we go to those galas, you kind of feel like, wow, this is, you know, do we really have to do this? And so I think we did it, but it was a big deal, and still is, I guess, but anyway. This is the pathologist, Dr. Burns, and he's working the equipment, blood testing equipment, which again, talk about stage for the newspaper, trust me. These guys didn't touch the equipment at all. The techs would have slapped their hands, you know, first thing. But of course, in those days, it's funny today, if you walk into some lab, basically the tube of blood would just go down a conveyor belt. The robot would take it out, take the sample, run it down. No human ever touches it. And then the results are put into the electronic record, and that's that. It's, you know, you would never see a machine like this. This is the other thing that sort of I thought was funny, although George says, is there anybody who knew Mr. Price here? Okay, we can tell the story. George says this guy was kind of a jerk. But anyway, oh, I didn't steal your thunder. But anyway, he was kind of thought he was a big deal because he purchased everything from the hospital. So, you know, this is like the supply sergeant, right? This guy, you know, knew whose palms to grease and all that. So anyway. And here was a big controversy. I guess part of the lot contained beachfront. Do you know anything about that, Eric?
No.
Yeah, so apparently they sold it. They said, we can raise some money, we gotta build buildings here, we don't need no stinking beach. And so they got rid of that and things of that nature as part of the thing. And then they come up with this 10-year plan, and really all the buildings you're gonna see that you see today were all scoped out in this 10-year plan that was done in 61 and pretty much completed by 71. I think the second doctor's office building came after that, but all the other stuff had been built. This is the list of the different things, you know, that was in that plan and things of that nature that they built. You know, there's the main building and then the two physician office buildings and the parking structure. During one of the openings for something in 66, Dr. Mayo comes to visit, and for those of you who haven't heard of the Mayo Clinic, what did you think of? But Dr. Charles Mayo, one of the Mayo brothers, was the dedication ceremony speaker. And then, of course, it makes the postscripts, the society page, you know, about, you know, going to the, and it was, she was the head of the, Women's Auxiliary, and so they go to the home of Donald, Mr. and Mrs. Donald Peter in Emerald Bay. And all the big prominent, and in the same article, just right above it, is Papa coming back from Hong Kong. His daughter lived in Hong Kong. This guy, as we'll learn about in a minute, was pretty rich. Oh yeah, here's some more pictures. Starting in, his nickname was Papa, and they make him permanent chairman of the board. Other people served as president, but he was the chairperson, and there's tons of pictures. This is the day he dedicated a plaque in the hospital to Myford Irvine and the Irvine Foundation for giving the land and starting things out. And he got this, he's getting an honorary degree from California College of Medicine. He makes his money, as we'll find out about it, by he started, he was an immigrant, came to New York, gets in the book business in Brentanos, right? And works for them for a while in New York, and says, hey, I want to go to Chicago and take over your store there. He takes over and literally builds it up to the biggest bookstore in the world. And so he wrote a book about it, The Great Bookstore in Action. And as we were laughing about it, he didn't have any trouble finding a publisher when you own the biggest bookstore in the world. This is his obituary. He passed away at 96. His wife preceded him by about, I think it's 7 years. And the other thing he did is give a lot of books and money to the UCI library. So if you're ever up at the UCI library, a lot of books and things were from him. And again, building continues. I think most of you would recognize the hospital now, but if you look at this, notice this was originally only going to be a couple stories, not higher than that. But the final build, this is just some, again, building by building. This is the final building as you see it today. They put birthday candles, quote unquote, because it was 12 years, it was in 71, 12 years, happy birthday. And this is, does anybody know Frances Jean Catterall? Is that how you pronounce it? Anyway, you can see she's holding up a match like she's lighting the candles on the birthday cake. That's the picture there. So, and again, her dress has changed a little bit too from what you saw in the 50s. The site is pretty much as it looks today, and you can see the parking structure in the back there, the physician buildings, one up in front, and then the main hospital building and things of that nature. This is the view from PCH, and they actually apparently own all the land up above it as well. Yes, ma'am?
Where was the maternity ward?
Yeah, so where was the maternity ward? This is a sort, actually, y'all are going to get into that, aren't you? You said it the other
They're
day.
on the ground
Yeah.
floor.
So,
Same
it
with
is right here, right?
yeah.
And Woody and George are pissed because it should have been right up there on the top, right?
We didn't get to go out on the curve. They put the intensive care up above on the circle. When you're in intensive care, you're not interested really in
You just-
water.
It's hard to turn your head.
Did go out in the curve,
It's sticking out your head. But, they're not sore about it. It obviously doesn't matter to them. And then, as I said, the events that happen in healthcare between the other hospitals going, at one time it didn't matter that the other hospitals had started up because things were growing so fast. But South Coast really ends up being in a position, first of all, half of the drawing area is water. And that's a problem. That's a problem when you're trying, because that, you don't get many dolphins showing up to deliver, right? So that's an issue. As I said, the competition gets to be a problem, and of course access, because of PCH, gets to be a problem. And then of course we begin to see the changes in healthcare, like managed care and things of that nature, and networking, et cetera, which again is another talk I won't get into. But they really get into, all of a sudden what was a very profitable hospital, because it was in a good community, begins to have financial problems. And so in 1997, they began to look for a partner. They joined the Adventist Health System. That goes for just about 10 years, and then the Adventists could not make it work financially, and that's when the hospital decides to be sold to Mission as part of the St. Joseph Health System. And then, and the reason it's called Providence St. Joe's now is Providence, a very big health system in the Northwest, merges with St. Joe's system to become that. And in between there, really the last big building that went on was the Susan and Bill Gross emergency room addition. Here's Mr. Skelton. Did that man ever have a picture taken where he wasn't laughing or smiling? he must have been something. But again, you can see through this time period, there's still building and stuff going on. I think they're here opening up the cancer center is what these pictures are from. When they were looking who to merge with, when they eventually choose Adventist Health, they looked about joining the St. Joe's system, but I guess there was too much politics between Mission and South Coast and a lot of different reasons that they didn't go that way. They also looked at going for profit with HCA out of Nashville, and again decided, no, we want to be a nonprofit. And so they went with the Adventist system, and again, that happened in '97. And pretty much the Adventists, you can see some of the signage and things of that nature. They kept the hospital running nicely and doing things, but again, they just never could make it financially work. It was really, the Adventist system is mainly in northern and middle California, and so they just couldn't, from a contracting standpoint, get any good contracts for South Coast by not being nearby. And so again, they start looking for a buyer, and St. Joe's and specifically Mission decide that this would be a good addition, that they could make it, and the hospital was sold in 2009. This is the attorney, when a nonprofit sells to a nonprofit, you have to get the blessing of the Attorney General, and that was. And the hospital was purchased by Mission for $35.7 million and to take over the assets and the liabilities, etc. And before they put the crosses up that you see on the building now, they had all the caregivers, and this one of the physicians signing the back of the crosses, which St. Joe's at the time did. And pretty much that's how it is today. I mentioned the new emergency department and that, but that's up there. The signage is kind of interesting, just so you know, as time goes by. Now that Providence and St. Joe's have merged, they've decided to change the signage again. And so it's going to be called Providence. It'll have Providence, but it's going to have the St. Joseph Cross. And so when you see it, you'll see that, but it'll still be called Mission Hospital Laguna Beach. They're not going to change the names of the hospital, just the logos that are up there. As I said, this was a big grant and was the last major improvement. There's a lot of modern equipment there, radiation therapy. The parties have continued, I think it will, oh yeah, there you go. So, I think are those millionaires? I don't know. Maybe that's the lady who delivered, no, I'm just kidding. So anyway, they're still there, and it's still going, and actually doing, in talking to the administration and things of that nature, doing well. Obviously the obstetrical service and the guys, I think will get into that about when that closed and some of that. It doesn't have obstetrics today. It's mainly surgery and the chemical dependency and the mental health, which actually is in healthcare a very sweet spot to be in right now, because there's a lot more funding coming in for mental health and dependency for obvious reasons. So with that, I'm going to pass the microphone to George Whitty.
I'm going to ask you to go first, because he's got the latest on it, because I left here in '88.
Oh.
Anyway. Get my notes here so that I don't miss any of the goodies that David didn't tell you about. I was surprised when I got a note from David asking me if I wanted to help with this talk tonight. The last time I really worked with David was when the two of us were when we opened the women's hospital in Saddleback. He was the medical director and I was chief of staff at that time. So how he got over here, That's another talk.
Yeah, it's another story. But I came into practice here in 1971, and I joined Bill White, with Woody's dad, and Ed Stoney in the practice, and our office was at the Bray Medical Building at the entrance to Three Arch Bay. So it was pretty nice. We lived in Three Arch Bay. The office was across the street, and the hospital was a half mile up the road. My first patient at the hospital, and this was after the completion was done, this last one that they told me. There was a 17-year-old girl having a miscarriage, and they didn't have any rooms available. They were all full. I had to put her in the hallway with partitions around her for privacy. The hospital was very, very busy at this time, being the only hospital between Hogue and Tri-Cities down in Vista. So you can imagine. So the hospital was doing very well, and to be very honest with you, they were not really very doctor friendly. They called the shots. And I remember that somebody told me that the administrator, the chairman of the board called it his hospital. And Ed Stoney told me that the hospital actually had a bed tax, that every time a doctor admitted a patient to the hospital, they had to pay the hospital some money. And Ed said he never paid it. I guess he couldn't kick you off the staff. He didn't pay, so what the heck, why not? But it was not, the administration wasn't real doctor friendly for a number of years, and to be very honest with you, a number of the administrators were not the greatest as far as planning and stuff was concerned. The best administrator they had was the fellow that was there when they sold to the adventists. He was a pretty sharp fellow. Another incidence of a non-friendly atmosphere was that Dave alluded to was the purchasing agent. In my residency, I learned we were taught to do epidural anesthetics, which is nice when you're in labor because you and we were taught to do them, we did them ourselves. And nowadays it's the anesthesiologists that do them. And the needle that you use, that we were taught to use to put in, to feed the tube into the epidural space, is called a Crawford needle. It's a thin-walled needle, and it's disposable. And the needles that Bill and Ed were using were caudal needles, where the entrance at the tip of the tailbone. And it's like a 10-penny spike compared to the Crawford needle. And they didn't have any Crawford, so I asked the head nurse on OB to have the purchasing agent order me some needles. And at first she came back and said he wouldn't do it. You had to use the ones that were there. And I jumped up and down, hollered and fussed, and he said, okay, I'll buy you one box. And these were disposable. He says, we're gonna have you use one box, and then you're gonna have to learn to use the other kind. So I asked the head nurse, who was Mrs. Jonesy, I said, you take a Crawford needle and a caudal needle down and hand it to him, and ask him which one he wants shoved in his back. And after that, I got all the Crawford needles I needed. I guess it was about 1974 or 75, the government was pushing to have regional perinatal centers. They wanted centers of excellence where all the specialties connected with OB and babies were in one hospital. And the word was that if the government did it, the hospital, that perinatal center would be located in Orange, the city of Orange. Can you imagine living here and trying to get to Orange to deliver a baby? Or if your doctor down here trying to get to Orange. So all the doctors down here figured we'd get a jump on them. So the doctors from South Coast and San Clemente and Mission and Saddleback, Saddleback just opened. We asked each hospital to give us their plans for a perinatal center. And we had a sheet of paper with all the equipment and instruments that we wanted. We put them in a column on the left side of the page and left the right side of the page blank for them to fill it in. San Clemente couldn't afford it and said they couldn't. And Saddleback was brand new and said, we're not ready for that. So it wound up being South Coast and Mission. The hospital administrator at South Coast at the time was a retired Marine medic. I think he was a sergeant, he was not an officer. But he was the administrator of the hospital. And he actually crossed out some of the columns on the left and then wrote things in on the right. So we were not terribly happy about that. The Mission Hospital said, we'll give you $3 million and build you whatever you want. And so that's where we were gonna go. And about that time, they put the administrator and the owner of Mission Hospital in jail because they were crooks. They'd been embezzling the hospital for a number of years. So we went back to the same way. Saddleback at that time had an OB unit. As a matter of fact, I was the chief of OB when the hospital opened, and they asked me what kind of equipment and stuff that they should buy. And I said, I don't think you ought to buy anything because all the doctors are happy at their own hospitals. And they didn't have a unit, they gave up on it, and the only time they did it was when the university came in and they built the perinatal center. One of the things that I enjoyed about surgery here was the camaraderie of the team. We had a small staff, everybody worked well together, everybody liked each other, and there weren't a lot of personality problems and egos at that time. It was good times. One of the anesthesiologists was Milton Klotzbach. Does anybody, that name ring a bell? He liked epidural anesthetics also. And we did a lot of surgery using epidurals. So we could do a cesarean section or even, abdominal hysterectomy, vaginal hysterectomy with an epidural, which is nice anesthesia. Important in this day and age when we're worried about the effects of general anesthetic on your noggin up here these days. And it was fun with Milt because he had an IV standard and he hooked a big round mirror on it that slanted out over, and he put it up so after doing the cesarean section, the patient could watch their baby being born before they would, let you in the operating room. And I remember I did a hysterectomy on one of the nurses on OB, and she was watching the thing and asking questions through the whole operation. Fathers in the delivery room. When I started, we didn't let the fathers in the delivery room, and it was a big deal. We discussed it a long time, and we finally decided to do it. But it was interesting when we started letting these guys in. You had to worry about two patients. You had the woman that you're trying to get have the baby, and the father making sure he didn't pass out. And we had a number of them go down. And we had to watch for them. We tell them, sit down and get your heads between your legs. And most of them, one of the guys that is a Fahrenheit 451 bookstore still around?
Yeah.
Well, and I delivered the fellow that owned, the wife of the fellow that owned that. And they'd been playing music in the room. He had a boombox, they were playing probably some new age stuff. And as I was getting the patient ready and everything, he's in the room or over here, and I got started to work and I turned around, my table was behind me with all my equipment and sterile table. I turned around and I looked, and here's his boom box sitting right in the middle of my hands. Which didn't help me. We did have a birthing chair. Did you find out anything about that birthing chair?
No,
Dan?
I couldn't dig anything up other than.
We bought a birthing chair. The beds you labored in were just regular hospital beds. So this was before they got the beds that you can labor in and deliver in. So we had this birthing chair that you could tip it and you could sit up straight or lie down. And we had a lot of patients like that. And it made the newspapers and the TV, I think. The other famous thing that happened down here is that we delivered the first in vitro baby in Orange County. And I think she was the first successful pregnancy at USC Med School. And they usually follow you for about the first 3 or 4 months to make sure you're doing okay. But she lived in Mission Viejo, and they sent her to me for OB care and delivery. Well, when she went into labor, she called the TV newspaper, on the TV news. So we had the TV news trucks down here with all their antennas and so forth, and all the interviews after that. And I never was able to follow. Someone told me they were divorced, but I'd like to meet that kid today. So I don't have any comments. I think that's probably turned over to Woody.
Thank you, George. I got into this business largely watching my dad, Bill White, who George joined, like I said, in '71, and my dad got here in '61, so it wasn't too long after the hospital opened, and he was the first of the board-certified guys in OBGYN. He trained at UCLA, and so most of what I saw with respect to the hospital was through the eyes of a kid growing up in Laguna, which is, we were saying earlier, what a wonderful thing to have happen, to get to grow up in Laguna. So I saw it that way, and then I was fortunate to go on and join these guys. It was, how many people get to work with their dad and with others who are, especially good at what they did. Dr. Harper, Dr. Stoney. And I don't know how many of you knew Dr. Stoney. I was mountain biking with him a couple days ago up in North Laguna, age 83 or something. The guy's an animal. I was saying, so George sort of covered some of the turbulence, maybe the growing pains of our hospital here. And when I arrived, things were quite tame by comparison. And these needles and what kind of needle you were using, we was pretty standardized to an epidural. Whereas when my dad was a younger doctor in the 60s, he might have used the needle that George described, and among other ways that were really necessary to take care of women laboring, because can be a very painful process. And these guys were really, really good at, as obstetricians, providing relief of pain to women in labor. And then that all morphed by the time I arrived, because by then the anesthesiologists were taking care of all that. I was gonna say, one of the funniest images maybe you could imagine was myself operating with this guy, which we did not infrequently, and I'm trying to remember how we did that. Like if I was doing a C-section and he assisted me, he's like 6'4", right? 6'6". I'm sure we raised a table as high as it could have gone, and I was probably on a stool that high. It was the most ridiculous thing you could ever imagine.
I made him stand on a stool.
Woody, you should have told him to get a hold to stand in. You were the primary surgeon.
Well, these guys are really good to me, and I'm very grateful for working with them, even though he's 6'6". It's not his fault. Well, when I started, I remember many years ago, my uncle, who was a dentist, was complaining about the advent of PPO insurances, and I didn't understand what he meant because I was not involved in any of that, but when I was coming out of residency at LA County, they were talking about HMOs, and that's where things were beginning. When I came out of residency, they wanted me to join a new entity at the hospital called an IPA, and I was young and relatively hungry, if that's the right expression, so I joined the physician group called an IPA, and they started HMO Healthcare, and that was in the late 80s here at South Coast Medical Center with Mike Murray, who was the CEO then. But the rest of my experiences in the hospital, like I said, were relatively tame. We had a wonderful set of nurses and so forth, and the hospital did go through the growing pains and financial crises that led to a couple of sales and worries on everyone's part about whether the hospital was going to survive. And then I stopped working just before the OB department closed, and by then they had moved from the center of the hospital down to the lower floor of the towers out front, the curved part. That's where OB did wind up eventually, which was, we all wanted it up higher where you could see the whitewater, but they never agreed with that. As a kid growing up, it was interesting. My dad was, I think, by himself for a while at Joe Bray's building at 3 Arch, and he had an office there. And I'm trying to remember, there were 1 or 2 people who joined him for a short while, but it was before doctors could easily be contacted for various kinds of fairly urgent situations. I mean, I've been there and George has been there, but these would always, back then, it might be, we're playing Little League at Riddle Field in North Laguna in Bow Canyon, and the cops would show up and start looking for my dad, who needed to go to the hospital because something was unraveling there, and he needed to get back down to the hospital from Riddle Field. Or another good one was the knock at the door at 1 in the morning, and it's the police again coming to find Dr. White to get him to go to the hospital. Which you just never hear about things like that. It sounds so strange, but that happened not infrequently. And we used to have a party line. Did anybody have a party line here in Laguna? You pick up the phone and someone else is talking to someone else about it, and they needed to get off the phone so he could call the hospital and see what was going on. These are little curious things about the medical, the doctors in Laguna. I was also reflecting on, we have a signal there at the hospital, and when I was about a junior at Laguna High, me and Eric Hurd were driving up from our house in South Laguna to the ball field at the high school. We had a baseball game. Second base, he was catcher. And a guy was at the intersection there at the hospital and started pulling out, and there was no signal there. And he couldn't see the south, because he couldn't see me coming northbound. The only collision in my entire life, my only wreck I've ever gotten, I flipped my older brother's VW Beetle upside down in the middle of the Coast Highway, right smack in front of the hospital. And I'm pretty sure that's why there's a signal there now. we both, no seat belts, we walked away, we went and played the game. My brother was pissed. But so was my dad. Well, it's been a pretty neat little hospital. I think no one would say otherwise. And my 2 kids were born there, and I'm sure a lot of you have been there and maybe had a kid there too. And I think it's going to keep working out really well for all of us, that little hospital. Nice presentation by Dr. Lagrew. Good to see Dr. Harper and his family. Thank you.
We thank you very much for these wonderful presentations, and I learned a lot. And I see other parts of Laguna Beach history fitting right in. John Wells, we had a year ago, we had the world premiere of his film, and he was very prominent here. In fact, that scene where they had the simulation of the dead people, I said it was out front, it said the Laguna Beach Post, that was his newspaper. That was John Wells' newspaper, they held it in this place. A lot of this stuff fits in. Do any of you have some questions you'd like to ask? Let me give you this is being on tape, so we need to have it. Thank you.
There was discussion about Adventist Hospital, and since this is being taped, and this is history, as I understand, Adventist could never make a profit because every year they took the first $1 million and gave it to the church. And that the other thing that happened with Adventist was the community had, I think, thank you to Kathleen Blackburn and other people, had a very aggressive fundraising campaign. And there was a lot of money there. And the money went with Adventist when they left. So Mission never got the benefit of the generosity of the community. So it was tough, and it looked like we weren't going to have a hospital. So we were definitely in a position to, Mission had a lot of leverage during the negotiations.
Why don't you pass that back? Somebody behind you there had their hand up.
Yeah, could you tell us a little bit about, like, for example, another three-archway doctor, Tom Morrow, who just died a couple of years ago? About when did he join the hospital?
What's the question about?
About when did Dr. Tom Morrow of Three Archway join the hospital staff? Do you remember?
Before you, right? He was there before you, wasn't he?
Okay. Okay. Roy Burns was referred to, and there were a couple of photographs. Dr. Burns just died last year at age 94. He served for 3 consecutive terms as mayor of San Juan Capistrano. Just took his 91-year-old wife out to breakfast the Sunday before Christmas. They still live in San Juan Capistrano. During the transition, there appeared to be, I served on the advisory board. For those of you that don't know, Dr. Lagrew mentioned that the Attorney General has to sign off when hospitals change ownership. But one of the provisions in the state law is that a citizens advisory group has to be appointed from among residents in this city to help ease the new owner into the community, to understand the community's values and educate them about everything from the water system to idiosyncrasies about the community and trees and everything else that abuts the hospital. So Elizabeth Pearson and Councilmember Kinsman, Sir Betty Anderson, myself served on that committee for 4 years, which is when we got to learn and work very closely with Michael Beck, who we found to be an extremely calm, I don't know what it looks like, if you work there, but boy, he sure seems to be a calm guy from the outside. But during that transition, the Adventists went and sanitized everything, and they ripped all the plaques off the walls, and they disappeared. There was a plaque that I had a picture of a portion of that had the names of all the principal donors at the beginning, including Myford Irvine and others, a member of my family and stuff. And I put Michael Beck, tried to interest him, and they scoured the place. But the Adventists went and stripped everything that accounted for the generosity of the residents of town that donated the money to build it in the first place, which gets exactly what Tony was talking about, because what they were doing is they were siphoning off that, those donations. So that was one of the things that was kind of an injustice, unfortunately, was to lose that identity, because there were many names that we would recognize on that plaque, and it disappeared. It was only about, I don't know, maybe 14 by 11 inches high, but it had about 40 or 50 names on it.
Yeah, that's a shame, because if you look at it, you could see from the articles, I mean, you are literally talking, I bet it had to be 75% of the members of this community helped build this institution. So to lose that, sponsorship and what they put into it, yeah, that's a pretty big injustice.
Right. But, I'm glad to know, I'm so gratified to see all these newspaper articles that you threw up there, because I'll bet we could reconstruct at least what I don't have in my picture, which is a portion of the plaque, the other names.
Yeah.
But
I think this is the battery. So yeah.
it's time to hand this over.
No, that's okay. No, I agree with you, and I think, and to be honest with you, Eric, I couldn't use all the stuff I found. I mean, a lot was given to me by the hospital. The hospital does have these archives, and to your point, I think it'd be good to go picture by picture and clear out the names and that sort of thing. We could put that together. Again, because like I say, I mean, that's what struck me as really an outsider is, wow, this is pretty impressive how much all these people love this community enough to build that place. So to your point.
Also, a lot of Irvine kids, members of the Irvine families, kids that were born in that house.
Yes. We probably could check with them and get more history on that as well.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to bring up the name of, the microphone. I don't need no microphone. We might get on the recording.
Reverend Raymond Braun's of the Community Presbyterian Church, in their write-up, they say that he called a meeting about a hospital being needed in the late 40s in Laguna Beach. And the intention was to build the hospital in Laguna Beach. The numbers you had up there is that Hogue opened in 1952, and the officer died in 1953. And of course, I think it changed the name a little bit, but anyway, it's Hogue Presbyterian Hospital. And Reverend Braun's, who was the builder of the churches, he came to Laguna Beach in 1925, and within about 3 years, built that Presbyterian church there at 2nd Street and Forest Avenue. So he was quite a mover and a shaker. And the thing, as Eric mentioned, John Weld, during most of the photos and the newspaper clippings, he was the publisher, or Ed said it, of the Post. And of course, it was kind of cute to see that the South Coast News with John Well's picture in it, because he was the competitor. And people haven't read it. My understanding is that John Well wrote a column for the Post, Laguna, I Love You, and then the number of his best columns were put together for a book entitled Laguna, I Love You. Of course, it's out of print, but I'm sure there's information about a lot of stuff in there, like being a stuntman in the movies.
Any other questions?
I got a story to tell. Back in the, I don't know what year, 54, 55, 56, somewhere in there. Me and my two sisters had a lemonade stand on the corner of Wilson and Oak Street. I was on Lombardi. We raised $600 to build the hospital. I saw the name up there, Peggy Taylor. I know now who instigated it, because that was my mom's best friend. She lived at the top of Anita, one house down from the top of Anita. Officer French lived next door to her, to Selma Allen. So I knew the Frenches and I knew the Allens, because I used to stay overnight up at the Allens sometimes. And their one son, they had a son named Terry Allen. But when I saw that name, Peggy Taylor, up there as a major donor, she's the one that instigated it, but I had no idea until tonight that that's what instigated that. And I was born in St. Joseph's because there wasn't a hospital here. I lived, when I was 3 days old, on Woodland Drive in the log cabin house my mom bought for $600. And the receipt, she had it like from a hardware store, one house. There was no address then, it was at the corner of, I guess, Ferry Lane or Roosevelt, I don't know exactly, I can't remember.
Are you talking about the Hemingway
log
house?
cabin type house.
The Hemingway house?
I don't know, it was the one Timothy Leary stayed in, a brotherhood house where they made the LSD, I know that.
The Brotherhood of Eternal
Yes,
Love.
the LSD worldwide, but, my share, I'll tell you what. But, and I just visited that hospital in January of, not last year, last year, January. Oh, no, a year before now. So it's been 2 years since I had my hip. I'm 72 years old. I had 3 screws in this hip 30 years ago. I was slowly getting crippled. My feet were upended and my knee was going in. I was having a lot of trouble walking. And by luck, I got a real good surgeon, Dr. Gus from San Clemente. If anybody needs surgery, I'll tell you what. He measured, he got my legs the same length. Now sprained my ankles about 100 times in the last 2 years. And I walked out of the hospital, and you know what? I haven't seen him since.
Thank you. I would like to ask that we all give our 3 doctors and others another hand. And I would also like you to join us in our meetings as members, as volunteers at the Laguna Beach Historical Society. We're all volunteers. Our next 2 meetings are on Thursday, March 5th. Bob Borthwick will present the history of the 1935 Laguna Beach sewage treatment plant, also known as the Laguna Beach Digester. Almost, that's not the official name. And then we have one in May, on Tuesday in May, we don't know which Tuesday, on the history of the Pacific Marine Mammal Center up the Cape. So we'd like you to join us for that, and we have the Murphy Smith Bungalow, which is our headquarters on Ocean Avenue between Whole Foods and Wells Fargo Bank. Is open every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 1 to 4 p.m. and it's open by volunteers. So we hope to see you around. Thanks for coming.